In the last episode, we spent our full day on Cayo Costa State Park exploring the island. Cayo Costa is a barrier island located off the coast of Fort Myers, Florida. Because you have to take a ferry to get there, it is really nice to explore the island with hardly any people there. So we walked up to the north side of the island and checked out the beaches. We went back around to the ferry terminal and we got some ice cream, and then went back to our campsite to explore the south side of the island. And then we got ready to enjoy our last night on Cayo Costa. It's just a really quiet, nice beach experience to start our trip.
So don't let the weight of the world slow you down. And if you search for the meaning of life, it won't be found. So take your insecurities and leave them all behind. Let's learn to make the most of our time. Of our time.
After making dinner, we took our food up to the beach because it was time for our last sunset on Cayo Costa, and we really wanted to sit there and soak it in and enjoy it. The island was so quiet because so many people had left. This was really that calm, relaxing experience that we were looking for the first stop on our trip. We picked up firewood when we went down to the camp store that day, and even though it wasn't as cold as the past nights, it was still really nice to have a campfire. The next morning, I woke up just after sunrise. We had left the stargazer side of our tent open, so I had a clear view of the morning sky, and I could see that it was a really nice sunrise. So I grabbed the camera and headed down to the beach. This is one of my favorite things when we're traveling, waking up early when it's still very quiet. If you get a nice sunrise, that's just a bonus, but walking around before everybody is awake is such a treat, especially when you get to have scenery like this to soak in. You can see that with this perfect sunrise coming up, I still had the beach completely to myself, except for these fun little birds running around. And we always say that if you want to go somewhere and really experience solitude, you want to go to somewhere that's just a little bit more difficult to get to. In this case, because Cayo Costa is only accessible by ferry, you don't have as many people here. It really gives you that experience that you're looking for if you're looking for quiet. Now, maybe not so much on the weekend, but definitely during a weekday you can see that this was the perfect quiet beach experience that we were looking for. As it got brighter, I started to head back toward the campsite because today was the day we were leaving the island. So I wanted to get started on breakfast and coffee before Patrick was awake. And then we could start taking down the tent and packing everything up so that we could go down and catch the tram to the ferry terminal. It's really important that we didn't miss the ferry because there's only one ferry in the afternoon that will bring you from Cayo Costa back to the mainland. And we had a reservation at an Air BnB that night, so we were very much looking forward to taking a hot shower and being able to sleep in a bed for the first time in a couple of days. During the 2 nights on the island, we had to be really aware of rodents getting at our food. And even actually during the day, we had to be really careful. So the camp host gave us this cooler, and we were able to use a piece of paracord to hang it up in between 2 trees. And then we put a can lid on that paracord to make it harder for the rodents to climb down and get to the cooler. It did a pretty good job. They weren't able to get at our food, but they still tried to grab anything and everything that was left out on the table. They were really pretty aggressive, but that's a common thing. Areas where animals are used to people camping, they get so used to grabbing little pieces of food that they can actually get pretty aggressive. We hung up our food in the cooler that we were given so that the mice and the squirrels wouldn't be able to get to it. So our food was fine, but we left some of the stuff sacks on the table that have just like, well, this one was empty. It usually has our cook set in it, but the squirrels and mice still came over and ate holes into the stuff sack. So I think the next thing that we're going to have to add to our camping gear is the chew-proof, like, metal sacks that you can put things in. I wish I thought about that, because that's usually an issue on an island. Say there's another hole, they just, like, really tore this thing up. So, new stuff sacks.
We're not really used to heat, too, if we walked it.
Yeah. I mean, and we wouldn't have our, like, extra stuff if we were actually walking.
Yeah.
Pick him up?
Go pick him up. Oh, thank God.
If you plan ahead, you can catch a morning ferry over to Cabbage Key and have lunch there, but you have to make reservations for that ahead of time, especially because you don't really have service on the island. But this boat that was at the ferry dock, I'm pretty sure that's where they were going. That's a nice boat. Yay, we didn't have to walk. Cayo Costa has a very interesting history. It starts with the indigenous population that lived mostly off of fishing and some plants that they could catch. There were also some very early Cuban fishermen who would come up and use the area during the fishing season and then go back home. The island was used as a quarantine for ships that were returning, and it was even said to be a place where pirates would hang out if they were trying to stay under the radar. But the island was eventually used by a group of pioneers until they eventually left because it was a pretty harsh environment to try to live in full time. And the property was turned over to the state and in 1985 became a state park. There's a visitor center right across from the camp store that explains more about the history of Cayo Costa and some of the different uses that this island was involved in. You can rent kayaks and bikes here, and when we booked this we were thinking about maybe doing a kayak, but as soon as you get past these mangrove trees it is super windy, and we've tried to do that before and the water's pretty choppy, so it doesn't look like that's going to happen. We're just going to hang out and enjoy the sun, wait for the ferry. The Tropic Star ferry arrived at the dock to drop off the next group of people who were going to be staying on the island and some people who were coming out for the day, so that we could get back onto the ferry and head back toward the mainland to get our car. And then we were driving a little bit north to stay at an Air BnB tonight. Thank you so much for watching this episode and coming along on this trip with us. We have a lot more to show you from our trip in Florida, so I hope you stick around for the upcoming episodes.
Well, you worried about you and me, the injustice, the next president to be, the news and what you hear, your career. It's time for you to face those fears, and it's all fair to be aware, and I'll be there, so don't be scared. Just take a deep breath of air.